I was reading it to get a different translation, different interpretations, and this one said Old Testament and New Testament. And I'm like, okay, it kind of this way, that way, and I'm thinking, well, there's got to be a reason for it, that they call it one or the other, and I'm like, so I'm thinking about it, and a covenant is what? A contract, right? Contracts are good until when? The person who writes the contract and signs it does what? Dies. Then the contract is null and void. A testament, well, like a last will and testament, is the thought that came in my head, is what? It's also a contract, but when does it begin? When a person dies. And so how long is it enforced? Forever, right? It's written, right? And that's the will of that person who died. So I want to present to you this morning that it's actually both. It's the old covenant that Jesus came to fulfill. When he died, that contract became null and void. God declared that the Old Testament himself wasn't good enough. It proved that man couldn't do it on their own. And he provided the sacrifice. He provided the means for that to be fulfilled. And we talked about the different ways that it's how he fulfilled. And I just love going back in the Old Testament now and looking at these things and how they all point to Christ. Do you remember, Pastor, how many prophecies Jesus fulfilled? It was over.
Quite a few.
Yeah. Yeah, it was over 100.
Yeah.
Just think of the probability of just one or two prophecies being fulfilled for something to happen, let alone 100 plus. I'm thinking it's 130 something if I remember right. It's kind of not important at this point, but I mean, if you do that, I did statistics and stuff in college, and then just the probabilities, gets so exponential, the number of times whatever. The good news is, not only did Jesus die and become our New Testament, it begins when he dies. The good news is that he came back from the dead to make sure that we got it right, to enforce it, right? And so our prayer for you today is, this is not the end. We celebrate his resurrection, which is God's confirmation that all those prophecies being fulfilled is true. So he's come back now, and he lives in our hearts when we invite him in. That same Spirit of Christ who lived in Christ when he was on his earth walk, now lives in us. We get to do the same things, get to be him. So the enemy really screwed up bad when he took Jesus out, because he didn't realize that now instead of one, there was going to be an exponential number. You think how when Moses gave the Old Testament and he broke the tablets, because by the time he got down off the mountain, the children had already screwed up the first one. Thou shalt not have another god before, and they built this thing. He's angry, and he just broke the things, and the end result was 3,000 people died. That's the law. The New Testament of grace, when grace came, Christ came back to the disciples after he was resurrected, and he said, dude, you got to hang around in Jerusalem, because the cool thing is Dad's sending the Spirit. You got to wait for him, right? And so they're hanging out. There's 120 of them in this room when the Spirit comes. This is Pentecost. Pentecost 50 days from his resurrection. So the first Pentecost, or 50 days after Moses, 30,000 people died. The real Pentecost, when Christ came back and gave the Spirit, Peter stood out on the porch and preached the message, and 3,000 people gave their life to Christ. Amen? Don't you see the contrast, the beauty of how God has, from the beginning of time, planned this thing for us, that we should walk in it. We are all predestined to become conformed into the image of Jesus Christ. Amen.